Picture the desert at nightfall, the heat of the day vanishing quickly as the cool winds begin to weave across dunes older than any human story. Beneath the shifting sands and fractured limestone, the echoes of a forgotten tale lie waiting. 4. Centuries we've been taught that the pyramids of Giza rose some 4,500 years ago, crafted by kings whose names remain etched in temple walls. But what if that account is only the final chapter of something far older? What if those monumental forms were already ancient before the first hieroglyph marked a stone? You might see in your mind laborers in linen skirts, chisels in hand, oxen hauling heavy sledges under a blazing sun. But envision something different. The air cooler, the Nile broader, the horizon not barren but scattered with greenery and trees. Far away, vast ice sheets grind slowly toward the sea. This is not the Egypt of textbooks. This is Egypt, before the first pharaoh, before history began to write itself. Over recent decades, some geologists and historians studying the Giza Plateau have noted details that don't quite align with the accepted story. Take the limestone enclosure of the Great Sphinx. Its weathering patterns suggest centuries of heavy rainfall this region hasn't seen in thousands of years. In the 1990s, Boston University geologist Robert Schoch argued the Sphinx might predate dynastic Egypt, perhaps stretching back to the last ice age. Egyptologists rejected the claim, pointing out there were no inscriptions or artifacts to prove such antiquity. Even now, debate lingers over whether the deep grooves on its body mark ancient rains or the slow, grinding hand of wind and sand. It's unsettling, especially when you realize much of history depends on the belief that human civilization is young. Most lessons begin around 5,000 years ago with the rise of agriculture and city-states. Yet, every so often, a site or artifact emerges that whispers otherwise. Think of Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey. Vast circles of carved stone, raised some. 11,600 years ago, long before farming supposedly began. Its existence doesn't prove the pyramids are older, but it does hint that humanity's mastery of stone reaches deeper into prehistory than we once imagined. The official timeline is comforting, tidy, ordered, easily displayed in museums. But the human mind craves tidy answers, while real history is jagged and uneven. Stand at the base of the Great Pyramid. Trace your hand along its worn blocks, and you touch stone that was already old in Homer's time. These blocks have endured rain, earthquakes, and centuries of pilgrims, scholars, and looters. They've watched the stars shift, the desert creep forward, the Nile alter its course, and deserts hide secrets well. In 2013, archaeologists uncovered a perfectly preserved Roman ship buried deep in the Egyptian sands, hundreds of miles from the sea, a reminder that the unexpected lies beneath our feet. If a ship could endure nearly 2,000 years in the desert, why not something older still? Perhaps even an earlier layer of the pyramids themselves, hidden beneath limestone blocks. But stone is both guardian and trickster, weathered yet patient, concealing as much as it reveals. Limestone might be 20 years old or 20,000, and unless it bears an inscription, its true age can slip through our grasp. That's part of the allure behind the Ice Age theory. It hints at an older, less orderly history, one that refuses to fit neatly within dynastic timelines. But it also leaves vast spaces of uncertainty, and in those spaces, imagination begins to grow. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the journey. It's a simple way of letting me know you're out there under your own patch of night sky. And I wonder, where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? As you think on that, picture the pyramids not as the triumph of a youthful civilization, but as an inheritance, structures that stood mute for centuries before being claimed by the pharaohs whose names we know. Imagine them as survivors, their sharp angles worn down by thousands of years of rain and wind long before the Old Kingdom ever began. You don't need to accept it as truth. All you need to do is let the possibility pass through your mind, like a thin cloud drifting across the moon. History, after all, is not only what happened, it's also what we're willing to imagine. If your only glimpse of Egypt has been through glossy photographs, documentaries, or perhaps a summer visit, you might believe this land has always been bone dry. The kind of aridity that cracks your lips, that makes your eyes burn beneath an unrelenting sun. The Giza Plateau, with its endless beige horizon and towering monuments, seems like a place untouched by rain's gentleness. And yet, the stone itself tells a different tale. Run your eyes along its scars, and you begin to sense that water once spoke here with intimacy. The great Sphinx, eternal guardian of the plateau, is the clearest witness. Its immense lion's body and human face are carved directly into bedrock, and around it lies an enclosure, walls of limestone that carry a story no hieroglyph records. These walls are marked with deep vertical channels, grooves that curl and smooth as they fall, the kind of shapes carved by flowing water. Geologists trained in reading erosion have learned to tell wind's mark from that of rain. Wind scours horizontally, sharp and linear, as though a blade scraped the surface. Rain, however, softens stone, curling downward, wearing hollows and folds, leaving a rippled texture behind. In the 1990s, Boston University geologist Robert Schoch made international headlines by declaring that these marks were not the work of mere centuries of wind and sand. To him, they bore the unmistakable imprint of heavy rainfall of the sort this region hasn't seen for over 7 millennia. His conclusion was audacious. If the Sphinx's enclosure was shaped by water, then the monument must predate Pharaoh Khafre's reign, perhaps even stretching back to the waning days of the Ice Age, when the Sahara still held rivers and grasslands. The claim was met with fierce resistance. Egyptologists held firmly to their timeline, pointing out that the Sphinx's face resembles statues of Khafre, that it sits adjacent to his pyramid complex, and that nearby temples were built from limestone quarried out of the very pit in which the Sphinx rests. The logical conclusion, they argued, was that Khafre ordered its construction around 2500 BCE. Any weathering could just as easily have been caused by wind, sand, or occasional flooding from rising groundwater. To this day, the debate endures. Was the Sphinx scarred by rains of a forgotten climate, or merely by the relentless forces of wind and shifting sands across time? The truth remains just out of reach. Stone is frustratingly elusive. It carries its age in ways that defy simple measurement. Unlike wood or bone, it cannot be pinned down with radiocarbon testing. Unless an inscription clearly states, "carved in this year," its story rests entirely on interpretation. Geology against archaeology, climate science against cultural history, and the Sphinx isn't the only mystery. Nearby, the massive limestone and granite blocks of the Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple show similar patterns of erosion, some even more pronounced than on the Sphinx itself. To some, This suggests that these temples, too, may have been started during a wetter era, later absorbed into the grand architectural vision of the Old Kingdom. To grasp what such an era looked like, we must step back into deep time. Picture the world at the end of the last ice age, between 12,000 and 9,000 years ago. Glaciers and polar ice caps melted rapidly, sending torrents of fresh water into the seas and reshaping global rainfall and wind. North Africa entered what scientists call the African humid period. Monsoon rains reached deep into the Sahara. Where today there is only sand, vast lakes shimmered. The Nile surged with floods greater than any recorded in history, and the land around it flourished. Now imagine a monument carved in limestone during that age. Year after year, seasonal rains would have drenched it, soaking and shaping its surface. Over centuries, suddenly Egypt looks nothing like the one you know. Envision yourself standing before the Sphinx in that forgotten time. The air thick with the scent of wet earth and crushed greenery, the plateau dotted with fresh pools of rainwater, a distant waterfall pouring into a rocky basin, a scene nearly impossible to reconcile with modern Giza. The Sphinx itself, whether newly carved or already venerable, gleams wet in the aftermath of a storm, its sides dark with water. And odd as it may seem, even today in the hyper-arid Sahara, rare but violent, storms still occur. In 1975, for example, a single day's downpour in Algeria unleashed enough water to create rivers where none had flowed for decades. If such storms can erupt in today's desert, imagine a greener Sahara where rain might persist for months, relentlessly wearing into exposed stone. If the Sphinx does indeed predate the Old Kingdom, then the Fourth Dynasty pharaohs may have inherited not just fertile land, but also monumental architecture already centuries or millennia old. They could have restored it, reshaped it, even recarved its face to resemble their own kings. Later construction may have disguised the truth, making it appear as though they were its creators when, in fact, they may only have been its caretakers, and the implications are enormous. If proven, it would push back the origins of monumental stone architecture in Egypt by thousands of years, into a time when, according to conventional history, humans were not supposed to be capable of such feats. It would mean that knowledge of advanced building techniques once existed, only to be lost and forgotten long before writing began. Here lies the tension, the patience of stone against the impatience of humanity. Stone waits in silence, carrying its secrets across ages, while we demand answers, neat timelines, and certainty it refuses to yield. The Sphinx will never reveal the moment of its birth. The grooves carved into its enclosure will not whisper which century shaped them. They simply exist, silent yet insistent, challenging us to reconcile their story with our understanding of the past. As desert winds sweep across the plateau, carrying the dry breath of dust, one can almost sense the echo of a long farewell, the retreat of rains, the slow dying of rivers, the transformation of green fields into golden dunes. That transformation, more than any dynasty, any battle, any king, may have been the true turning point in Egypt's story. It prepared the ground for the desert we see today, and for the enigmas that still rise from it. Strip away the hieroglyphs, the royal cartouches, the carved images of pharaohs offering gifts to the gods, and what endures is only the raw geometry of stone. Blocks stacked in silence, indifferent to the centuries of tales draped over them. They do not reveal who placed them. They do not pledge loyalty to one dynasty or another. They simply remain, weathered but steadfast. And if we could travel far enough back, beyond the Old Kingdom, beyond the first writing, beyond the very idea of Egypt, we might stand before the original makers of those stones. Makers whose names were not erased by conquest or neglect, but simply by time itself. It is difficult to picture Egypt without pharaohs. Their faces and titles dominate. The monuments as though they had always existed. But what if the earliest great works along the Nile predated kings entirely? What if, before Narmer united Upper and Lower Egypt, there was already an architectural tradition? Silent, inscriptionless, without records we can read, yet imbued with intention and skill. Such thoughts are unsettling because they disrupt our tidy ladder of history, the neat steps of progress we like to believe every civilization must climb. Consider Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Unearthed in the 1990s, it revealed vast circles of towering T-shaped pillars, some weighing more than 20 tons, carved with reliefs of animals, foxes, boars, cranes, scorpions. And yet this place was built by a society with no cities, no pottery, no writing, nothing we associate with complexity. Its age? Around 9,600 BCE, thousands of years before the pyramids, even before the earliest temples of Mesopotamia. Göbekli Tepe forces us to question the assumption that monumental architecture must follow organized states or powerful rulers. Here, a people without kings, without armies, without bureaucracy, nonetheless moved mountains of stone for reasons we may never fully know. And it begs a larger question. If this could happen on the Anatolian plateau at the dawn of the Holocene, why not on the fertile banks of a wetter, wilder Nile? Imagine a community here long before the age of pharaohs. The Nile runs wider and deeper than it does today, bordered by marshes and clusters of trees. Along its banks sit small reed houses, villages where people fish, hunt, and perhaps tend. The earliest gardens. Knowledge passes not through writing, but through memory, stories, and repetition. And gradually, an idea takes hold. A shared desire to create something that will outlast them all. It would not have been a tomb, at least not as the Old Kingdom conceived them. Without writing, there were no royal names to carve, no reigns to record. Perhaps it was a platform for rituals, a marker aligned with stars, or a gathering place where the living honored the dead. We cannot know and perhaps never will, but they surely understood stone's endurance. Wood and clay rot, but stone defies time. If you wish your voice to reach across ages you cannot imagine, you carve it in stone. Oddly enough, the oldest known musical instrument, a flute fashioned from a vulture's wing bone, was found in a German cave. It is over 40,000 years old, and it still plays. Humanity has always sought to preserve beauty, whether through sound, color, or architecture. The will to endure is as ancient as the will to sing. So what would remain if these Nile builders left no writing? Only the stones, themselves, worn but standing, folded into later works. A future civilization, one with kings, armies, and scribes, might stumble upon these massive shapes and claim them, adding their own flourishes, covering them in the imagery of their age. In this way, the origin of such structures could vanish, hidden beneath layers of later history. Even now, scholars debate whether any part of the Giza complex predates the Fourth Dynasty. Mainstream consensus insists the pyramids, the Sphinx, and their temples belong entirely to that period. Yet history shows that monumental works are often reused. Romans built amphitheaters atop Etruscan foundations. Medieval cathedrals rose over Roman temples. Layers of past and present overlap everywhere. Why not here? Picture yourself on the Giza plateau at dawn, in that earlier time. The horizon glows pale gold as mist curls from the river. All around, people move with purpose, hauling baskets of stone chips, dragging sledges heavy with blocks, shouting, above the steady rhythm of tools striking rock. What you don't see are royal inscriptions, carved faces, or proclamations of power. This is architecture without ego, built for something we can no longer name. Centuries pass. The builders vanish, their language forgotten, their villages dissolved. Only the stone remains, enduring, silent, patient. Then, thousands of years later, the first pharaohs arrive. They inherit a landscape already scarred with mystery. And as rulers often do, they fold it into their story. They restore, reshape, and in some cases, recarve. Perhaps the Sphinx once bore a different face before Khafra's artisans gave it his own likeness. Perhaps the heart of a pyramid stood for centuries before its casing stones sealed it in gleaming white. We cannot prove it, but the possibility is enough to keep the question alive. And in that fragile space between evidence and imagination lies the wonder that keeps us staring at the stones, the stars, and the faint traces of people whose names are gone, but whose hands still linger in the weight of ancient blocks. Stand at the base of a pyramid, not the perfect white triangle you've seen in paintings or reconstructions, not the gleaming white slopes of artists' reconstructions, but the raw ancient blocks of the pyramid's exposed core. The rising sun glints across their edges, revealing a surface mottled in pale cream and rusty brown. Look closely, and you'll notice something odd. Not all the blocks appear the same. Some are joined with astonishing precision, seams so fine they are barely visible. Others are uneven, their edges chipped, their surfaces rough. Scattered among them are strange markings, grooves, chisel lines, circular impressions that don't seem to align with the simple copper tools the Old Kingdom masons are said to have used. This is the puzzle of the stonecutters from a forgotten age, if such an age existed. The accepted story is straightforward. The Great Pyramid, built for Pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE, was the work of thousands of laborers wielding copper chisels, dolerite-pounding stones, and wooden sledges. Limestone was quarried nearby, granite, hauled from distant Aswan, all raised into place through sheer human effort. And yes, copper can cut limestone with enough time and determination. But granite, that's another matter. Granite is dense, unyielding, far harder than copper could ever scratch. The granite blocks used in the Great Pyramid's inner chambers range from 25 to 80 tons each, shaped with remarkable precision. Some are polished so flawlessly that even today, replicating them would require diamond-tipped tools or industrial saws. Inside the so-called King's Chamber, massive granite beams span the ceiling, each weighing as much as a loaded rail car. It's difficult to reconcile this with the image of men laboring for years, hammering granite with hand-held dolerite balls. And when modern explorers first entered these chambers, they found something stranger still. Certain granite surfaces bore shallow, straight cuts, as though a saw blade had sliced through them. Elsewhere, circular drill holes sank several inches deep, marked with spiral grooves along their walls. To modern engineers, those grooves suggest the action of a high-speed rotary drill, something that maintains steady pressure as it turns. Experimental archaeologists have shown that copper tube drills with sand as an abrasive can reproduce similar holes, but the process is agonizingly slow, and the spirals they create don't quite match the ancient examples. And so the debate continues. Are these the results of extraordinary patience and skill with the tools of their time, or do they hint at techniques and materials long since lost? If the latter is true, then a more tantalizing question emerges. Who first developed those methods, and when? Could it be that builders long before the Old Kingdom refined techniques now forgotten, passing fragments of their knowledge down the ages, or leaving behind traces we have yet to recognize? Perhaps some of those abandoned blocks and half-cut stones were later reclaimed by Khufu's masons. An odd historical note. In 1837, Colonel Howard Vyse, a British soldier and antiquarian, uncovered red-painted quarry marks in hidden chambers above the king's chamber. These inscriptions included Khufu's name, and for more than a century, they were treated as definitive proof that the Great Pyramid belonged to him. Yet Vyse's methods have long been questioned, and some have even speculated about the possibility of a 19th-century forgery. Whether genuine or not, the episode highlights a deeper truth. Archaeological ownership often rests on fragile evidence, and our confidence in dating monuments can hang on a single painted cartouche. The idea of stone reuse further complicates matters. Throughout Egypt, archaeologists have found many cases where later rulers dismantled older monuments to construct new ones, sometimes erasing earlier inscriptions, sometimes leaving faint traces beneath fresh carvings. If the same practice occurred on the Giza plateau, then some blocks we now link to the 4th dynasty could in fact be much older. Unlike inscriptions, stone itself provides no clue about when it was first quarried, and the sheer logistics of cutting and transporting massive blocks suggests a level of expertise that would test even the highly organized bureaucracy of the Old Kingdom. At Aswan, unfinished obelisks and half-quarried blocks still lie abandoned, preserving the scars of their makers. Some fractured unexpectedly, forcing workers to leave them behind. Others were fully shaped, yet never moved. The most famous example, the unfinished obelisk, would have weighed over 1,000 tons had it been completed. Cracks doomed the project, but the mere attempt reveals either astonishing ambition or a long tradition of megalithic engineering inherited from earlier builders. Picture, if you will, that earlier age. The tools might not resemble anything familiar today. Perhaps they were still fashioned from stone, but used in ways we no longer understand. Perhaps their makers had discovered chemical methods to soften rock, a theory occasionally suggested, though never proven. Or perhaps they engineered simple yet ingenious devices that multiplied human strength without resembling the engines we know. Whatever the means, the results endured. Blocks so precisely joined that thousands of years of weathering and earthquakes have failed to pry them apart. It's worth remembering that advanced solutions need not resemble science fiction. Ancient societies often mastered elegant low-tech innovations that we now overlook precisely because they seem too simple. Roman concrete, for instance, kept its secret for centuries and produced harbors and vaults that still stand, while modern equivalents often crumble within decades. Polynesian navigators without a compass crossed entire oceans guided only by stars, swells, and the flight of birds. And so the stonecutters of Giza, whether Old Kingdom Egyptians or builders from an earlier forgotten tradition, may have possessed forms of knowledge that strike us today not as futuristic, but as simply, profoundly effective. It's possible that someone far earlier had their own suite of techniques, methods slowly refined, passed from one generation to the next, only to vanish with time. In some parts of Egypt, especially around ancient quarry sites, unfinished cuts still scar the stone. Some of these marks hint at a curious scooping method, where entire arcs of rock seem to have been carved out in single sweeping curves, a process difficult to explain using only pounding stones. Even today, wandering among the pyramids, you can see the fingerprints of countless hands etched into the stone. The quality varies from block to block, suggesting not only different levels of skill, but perhaps even different eras of construction. It is not hard to imagine earlier masons, long forgotten, laboring under the desert sun, carving the first great blocks of Giza. Their sweat, their breath, their quiet persistence, all absorbed into the stone, only for later ages to claim the results as their own, and so the puzzle lingers. Are these marks and blocks, their improbable precision and immense scale, solely the work of Old Kingdom Egyptians? Or do they whisper of an even older chapter in Egypt's story? The stone refuses to answer, but every chisel mark, every drill hole, every impossible joint preserves the possibility. Place your hand on the ancient surface, feel the warmth of the day giving way to evening cool, and you might sense not explanations but echoes, the touch of vanished hands. Step further back in time, far further than the Fourth Dynasty. Imagine standing here on the Giza Plateau 20,000 years ago. The air would press against your skin differently. Days would still blaze with desert warmth, but nights would cut sharper, colder. Look northward, and you might glimpse skies heavy with clouds, a sight rare in Egypt today. Beyond the Nile Valley, the world itself was transformed. The planet then was locked in the grip of the last ice age. Vast ice sheets smothered North America, Northern Europe, and much of Asia, trapping unimaginable volumes of water in frozen form. Sea levels lay more than 100 meters lower than today, reshaping entire continents. Islands now separated by seas were once joined by broad plains. In the Mediterranean, coastlines stretched far beyond their modern boundaries, and the Nile, delta, today a flat, fertile fan, pushed much deeper into the sea. Egypt itself lay too far south for glaciers, but it was not untouched. The shifting climate rippled even here. At times the land grew parched, the air dry and brittle. At other times storms swept across the region, and rains returned in abundance. The rhythm of wind and water shifted with the great pulse of the Ice Age, reshaping the landscapes that would one day cradle the pyramids. Monsoons once reached farther north, swelling the Nile with richer floods, only to retreat again, leaving the river thinner and more fragile. The Sahara, too, was not yet the endless desert we know today. Instead, it was dotted with grasslands, scattered steppe, rocky highlands, and seasonal streams. Odd fact, while humans in the Nile Valley were adapting to these shifts, woolly mammoths still roamed the far north. Some survived on Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean until just 4,000 years ago, meaning mammoths still walked the earth at the same time the Great Pyramid was supposedly rising. The overlap of such different worlds is one of history's quiet wonders. If an advanced culture did exist in the Nile Valley during the Ice Age, they would have lived through constant change. The river might have shifted course often. Its floodplains could have spread wide during wet years, only to vanish in dry ones. To endure, people would have had to move their settlements, adapt their hunting and farming, and learn to navigate. Waterways that no longer exist today. Now imagine that during one of the rare stable windows of climate, when rains were reliable and the Nile steady, this culture decided to build something lasting. Perhaps not a tomb for a single ruler, as later pharaohs would, but a communal monument, a place of ceremony linked to nature, the stars, or the river itself. They might have chosen the Giza Plateau not only for its elevation, safe from floods, but also for its alignment with celestial markers. Then the climate turned again. Around 12,900 years ago came the Younger Dryas, a sudden 1,000-year return to near-glacial cold. Temperatures plunged, rainfall patterns shifted, and countless species vanished. In North America, the great megafauna disappeared. In the Nile Valley, plants and animals were transformed. If a civilization had flourished here before that upheaval, it may have been scattered or erased entirely. Mainstream archaeology insists that no such culture could have built monuments on the scale of Giza so early. They point out that farming, metalwork, and large-scale social organization only appear in Egypt around 6000 BCE, yet anomalies remain. Göbekli Tepe, for instance, proves that complex construction was possible among non-agricultural societies. In Egypt itself, Nabta Playa's stone circles, aligned with the stars and dating back 7,000 years, suggest an astronomical awareness predating the pyramids. Odd fact, if you had stood on the Giza Plateau during the late Pleistocene, you might have looked west across the Sahara and seen snow capping distant mountains, a scene hard to imagine in modern Africa. But in colder times, snow in the highlands of the Maghreb was far more common. If monumental structures had existed before the end of the Ice Age, much of the supporting evidence may now lie hidden. Rising seas from the melting ice sheets would have drowned low-lying settlements, particularly in the Nile Delta, burying them beneath the Mediterranean. Elevated and inland, the Giza Plateau may have been one of the few places where the largest constructions could endure untouched. Picture those earlier builders watching their world transform, the floodplains shrinking, the green land retreating, the air itself turning colder and drier with each passing century. Year by year, the climate grew warmer. Storms shifted in character. Migratory birds altered their patterns, and people noticed the subtle but relentless changes. Perhaps they told their children not only about the transformations they witnessed, but about the monuments they had raised. Structures meant to outlast the ages. Maybe they believed that someday others would stand here and understand. By the time the Old Kingdom emerged, the Ice Age was long gone. The pharaohs inherited a Nile that was calmer, more predictable. Yet if the Giza Plateau already bore monumental stonework, those rulers would have found it irresistible, a ready-made, prize to be claimed, reshaped, and woven into the story of divine kingship. That possibility reshapes how we see the pyramids. They may not simply be emblems of Old Kingdom power, but survivors from a world when ice and storm dictated the shape of continents, and human cultures rose and fell with the great climatic pulse of Earth. Stand at Giza today. Feel the desert wind against your face, and you may sense the faint ghost of that ancient chill. The air carries no ice crystals now, yet the stones remember. Before pharaohs ruled, before cities rose from mud brick, before the first hieroglyph was carved, there were stories. Tales whispered at campfires, along riverbanks, and in the quiet hours before dawn. Among the oldest in nearly every ancient culture is one about water. not the gentle floods that nurtured crops, but an overwhelming surge, a deluge that drowned the world. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians told of Ziusudra, a righteous man warned by the gods to build a vessel before a flood wiped away life. Later, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim retells the same story of survival, preserving his family and animals to repopulate the land. In Hebrew tradition, Noah is instructed to build an ark and endures 40 days of rain until waters rise above the mountains. Greek myth remembers Deucalion and Pyrrha, who endured Zeus's flood in a wooden chest, drifting until they landed on Mount Parnassus. Egypt's flood myths were quieter, folded into creation itself. In the Heliopolitan tradition, Adam rose from the primordial waters of Nun, creating the first mound of earth, then the gods, the sky, the air, and the world. Though more symbolic, some scholars wonder if this imagery, land rising from endless waters, echoes real inundations dimly remembered. Those memories may have roots in reality. Around 12,000 years ago, Earth emerged from the last ice age. Vast glaciers melted, pouring torrents into the oceans. Sea levels climbed more than 100 meters, swallowing coastlines and reshaping continents. One dramatic event, Meltwater Pulse 1A, raised seas by several meters within a single century. Imagine living then, by a coast or river. Each year the waters crept farther inland, fields drowned, villages erased. If the Nile Delta was inhabited, entire settlements could have disappeared beneath the advancing Mediterranean. Odd fact. Deep under the Black Sea, archaeologists have found traces of ancient shorelines and freshwater mollusks buried beneath saltwater species. This suggests that about 7,500 years ago, the Mediterranean broke through the Bosporus and flooded what was once a vast freshwater lake. To the people there, it must have felt like the sea itself rose overnight. Some believe this catastrophe may have inspired later flood legends. Can oral traditions truly preserve such distant events? Evidence says yes. In Australia, Aboriginal stories describe coastlines and islands drowned more than 7,000 years ago, details that align with modern geological reconstructions. If this memory survived there, why not along the Nile? Perhaps Egypt's earliest priests recited hymns about a great flood, not as metaphor, but as distant history, so old that it blurred into myth. If the pyramids, or even their foundations, predate the end of the Ice Age, then their builders might have lived through that deluge. Imagine standing on the Giza plateau, watching waters advance year after year, rivers carrying debris from upstream, swallowing fields and villages. Families retreat to higher ground, from ridges to hills, and at last to the monuments themselves. The most solid, enduring places in the land. For a time, the pyramids may have been islands in a drowned world. Even when the waters receded, the memory endured, passed from mouth to mouth, slowly shifting into legend. As memories changed and details blurred, the flood may have taken on divine weight, a punishment from the gods, or a cosmic reset. Later civilizations could have looked at ancient stoneworks and assumed they were built in response to such a disaster, perhaps as offerings to the deities who spared the survivors. Oddly enough, Egyptian temple reliefs depict enormous boats, capable of carrying multi-ton obelisks down the Nile. Crafted from Lebanese cedar, these barges were feats of engineering in their own right. It is tempting to wonder whether even in pre-dynastic times, shipbuilding skills were advanced enough to move entire communities during catastrophic floods. The near-universal presence of flood myths suggests they are more than imagination. They may be echoes of a species-wide memory, of times when seas swallowed the land again and again. In the Nile Valley, such a flood could have been both destructive and preservative, washing away villages, yet safeguarding the grandest monuments by leaving them high above the waters. By the rise of the Old Kingdom, these stories may have survived only as fragments, repeated in ritual, half-believed but still powerful. Pharaohs might have seen themselves as heirs to that survival, rulers of a land reborn from chaos. Whether they knew the true age of the monuments they claimed is uncertain. Yet the stones would have remained silent witnesses, holding within their mass the memory of a drowned world. Now, close your eyes and imagine the Sahara, not as an endless furnace of shimmering gold, but as a living landscape of green. Rivers wound across vast floodplains shaded with acacia, herds of gazelle and antelope scattered at the sight of hunters. Crocodiles drifted through calm waters. In the distance, a lake stretched and glittered under the sun. This was no fantasy, but the Sahara during the African humid period, between roughly 14,500 and 5,500 years ago. Shifts in Earth's orbit altered African monsoons, pulling rains northward and transforming the desert into a broad savanna. Today, satellites still reveal the ghostly traces of vanished rivers and lake beds beneath the sand, like veins etched on a leaf. Archaeologists, digging in what is now unbroken desert, have uncovered tools, pottery, and rock art depicting animals that cannot survive there today: elephants, giraffes, even hippos. Some carvings show boats, long and sleek, etched into cliff faces hundreds of miles from any modern shore. These were not the papyrus skiffs of later Nile farmers, but sturdier vessels, perhaps designed for river crossings or journeys across great inland lakes. It is a haunting vision, fleets of boats sailing across what is now barren wasteland. The African humid period reshaped Egypt's environment as well. The Nile's floodplain spread lush and wide, sustaining large populations with ease. Its seasonal floods were generous and dependable, renewing the soil year after year. Even the desert plateaus, including Giza, were less harsh, likely speckled, with grasses and shrubs instead of bare rock and shifting dunes. If the earliest stages of the pyramids, or their foundations, were conceived during this green age, their construction would have been far more feasible than under the arid skies of later Egypt. Abundant water could support workers and even serve practical roles, like wetting the ground to ease the hauling of massive stones. Food supplies would have been steady, solving the challenge of feeding thousands. Transporting blocks might have been simpler too, as boats could travel not just the Nile, but seasonal rivers and lakes that laced the landscape. Scholars still debate how swiftly this African humid period ended. Some evidence suggests the Sahara's shift was not uniform. Some studies indicate a slow drying over centuries, while others point to abrupt changes, perhaps driven by altered ocean currents or global climatic shocks. What is certain is that the desert's transformation from green to gold was catastrophic for those who lived there. Rivers vanished, lakes receded into cracked basins, and fertile plains gave way to dust. Communities were forced to move, searching for refuge in regions where water still flowed, most notably the Nile Valley. Such migrations could have brought skilled artisans, builders, and traders into closer contact with Nile inhabitants. Along with them may have come knowledge carried from across the once green Sahara, methods of shaping stone, architectural practices, or religious traditions. Over generations, these influences could have blended with local culture, giving rise to something entirely new. Oddly enough, in southern Egypt's Nabta region, archaeologists have uncovered stone circles and alignments dating back at least 7,000 years, perhaps earlier. Some alignments mark the summer solstice, revealing a surprisingly advanced grasp of astronomy long before Egypt's written history. It is tempting to see this as evidence of a broader cultural network that spanned the lush Sahara. When the rains finally failed for good, the desert returned with vengeance. What had once been a vast green heart of Africa became a barrier, severing Egypt from much of the West. Trade routes disappeared, and the fertile Sahara slipped into legend. Yet if monuments had been raised during that age, they would have endured, standing high as the land around them turned to sand. Imagine the pyramids not rising from barren desert, but surrounded by meadows, grazing fields, and flowing streams. Picture their reflection shimmering in a pool left by a summer storm, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth. This was the world of the Green Sahara, a world capable of supporting ambitious building projects long before the reign of the Old Kingdom pharaohs. As the centuries passed and the landscape dried, such monuments would have taken on new meaning. To later peoples, they may have seemed the work of gods, remnants of an age when the earth itself was kinder. The memory of the Green Sahara may have lived on only in stories, legends of a desert once in bloom, of rivers running where today lies only sand. And like all such tales, they would have carried a warning. Nothing endures forever, not even the ground beneath your feet. Stand on the Giza plateau at night, far from the glow of Cairo, and the sky opens like an ancient scroll. The heat of day vanishes quickly, replaced by a chill as the horizon deepens into velvet black. Stars emerge not as faint specks, but as brilliant fires that seem to lean closer, pressing against the dark. Even now, despite the haze of modern light, Orion's belt still hangs sharp above the desert, 3 points of light in a perfect line. Yet thousands of years ago, under skies untouched by artificial glow, the stars would have been so bright they cast faint shadows on the desert floor. For people without clocks, the heavens were both calendar and compass. Time could be measured by the rising of constellations, planting seasons predicted by the appearance of certain stars before dawn, and floods anticipated by celestial markers. If you were laying the foundation of a monument meant to last for millennia, you might choose to align it with the sky itself. The most famous of these ideas is the Orion correlation theory, introduced by Robert Bauval in the 1990s. He observed that the 3 pyramids of Giza, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, are slightly offset, mirroring the stars of Orion's belt, Al-Nitak, Al-Nilam, and Mintaka. Star maps revealed that this arrangement most closely matched the sky around 10,500 BCE. At that same time, during the spring equinox, the constellation Leo would have risen directly in the east, precisely where the Sphinx gazes. If correct, it suggests the builders were marking a date thousands of years before the pharaohs. Mainstream Egyptology remains skeptical, noting that such alignments can occur by chance and that no texts explicitly link the pyramids to Orion. Yet the precision of Giza's layout is undeniable. The Great Pyramid's sides are aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree, a feat challenging even today with modern instruments. How this was achieved is still debated. One plausible method involves observing the crossing point of two circumpolar stars, a fixed guide to true north. But because of the slow wobble of Earth's axis, known as precession, that stellar alignment would only have been accurate centuries before the accepted construction date. Odd fact, the ancient Egyptians divided the night sky into 36 groups of stars called decans. Each rose at a predictable time of year, creating a stellar clock so precise it measured time to within 20 minutes, over 1,000 years before mechanical clocks existed. If a pre-dynastic or even pre-Ice Age culture had worked at Giza, their bond with the stars may have been even deeper. Without writing, astronomy would have been preserved through oral tradition, with alignments in stone serving as both sacred markers and practical tools, anchoring seasonal calendars, navigation, and ritual to fixed points in the heavens. Precession shifts the stars so slowly that a single lifetime cannot detect it. But over centuries, the drift becomes undeniable. Imagine each generation noting Orion's rising during a festival, only to realize over time that the stars no longer appeared in the same place. To preserve that moment forever, they might have etched it into stone. Orion is not the only proposed connection. The Great Pyramid's internal shafts appear to align with specific stars. Around 2500 BCE, they would have pointed to Orion's belt and to Thuban, a star in Draco that once marked the pole. But in earlier epochs, those same shafts would have aligned with different stars, implying changing celestial priorities, perhaps even different cultures. Odd fact, many ancient civilizations linked Orion to a great hunter or warrior. In Egypt, Orion was associated with Osiris, god of rebirth and the afterlife. Aligning monuments to Orion may have been more than an astronomical feat. It could have been a symbolic bridge between human and divine, mortality and renewal. If Bauval's 10,500 BCE dating holds any truth, the symbolism may reach back even further, echoes of myths born in a forgotten age. From a time before the Sahara turned to sand, standing on the Giza plateau beneath a clear night sky, you can almost feel the weight of continuity. Across thousands of years, different peoples gathered here, gazed upward, and found meaning in the same constellations. Pharaohs, priests, and forgotten stargazers all shared the same canvas of stars. The builders of Giza seemed to work with a cosmic awareness we are only beginning to rediscover. The stars drift slowly, but stone moves slower still. Together, they form a dialogue between earth and sky, a language of alignments and monuments that we are still learning to read. If the pyramids truly preserve the memory of an older sky, they are not just tombs or temples. They are time capsules, carrying a message from a world whose heavens have shifted, but whose ambition still shines above us. Run your hand over the Great Pyramid, and you touch not only history, but geology. These blocks of limestone began as sediments on the floor of a shallow sea, millions of years before humans ever walked the earth. The Giza Plateau itself is part of a vast formation created during the Eocene epoch, when much of northern Egypt was submerged beneath warm tropical waters. That ancient ocean teemed with life, coral reefs, mollusks, fish, even large predators. When the waters receded, their remains hardened into limestone, preserving within them the fossilized memory of that ocean world. It's easy to forget that the pyramids are built of fossils in disguise. Tiny shells, corals, and the skeletons of microscopic sea creatures are embedded in the very stone. In some blocks, the imprints are so dense, the rock looks like solidified shell. Odd fact. The first recorded scientific observations of Giza's Stones came not from an Egyptologist, but a geologist. In the 19th century, travelers noticed seashells fossilized in the pyramid blocks, sparking speculation about the Nile Valley's ancient environment. Modern studies have confirmed their findings. The pyramids are literally built from the remnants of an ancient seabed. For most of the Old Kingdom, limestone from the Giza plateau provided the primary building material, while granite for the inner chambers was imported from Aswan. But some researchers have identified differences in the composition of certain limestone blocks. A few contain marine fossils and sediments not found in the local geology. This has led to a provocative question. Were some stones brought from other sites? If so, from where and why? The mainstream view holds that nearly all the limestone came from quarries at Giza, with only granite transported long distances. Yet the possibility of reused or imported limestone opens intriguing avenues. Could the pyramid builders have incorporated pre-quarried stone from older, forgotten monuments? If true, the pyramids may not only be monuments of their time, but also vessels carrying fragments of even earlier civilizations. The stones of Giza carry more than human history. They bear the mark of an ancient sea. Fossils are the most obvious traces, but marine origins also linger in subtler ways. Chemical signatures, mineral compositions, and isotope patterns reveal the oceanic past hidden within the limestone. When rain or desert wind strips away the weathered surface, it sometimes exposes new fossils, as if the stone itself is remembering where it came from. Consider the journey of a single block. Millions of years ago, it began as the body of a tiny sea creature. That creature lived, died, and sank to the seafloor, layer upon layer of shells and silt pressed together, slowly transforming into limestone. Ages later, humans cut that block, free, and raised it toward the sky, transforming seabed into skyline. The scale of time is staggering. Odd fact, whales once swam where the desert now lies. In Egypt's western desert at Wadi al-Hitan, the Valley of the Whales, archaeologists have uncovered fossilized skeletons of ancient whales, some still bearing traces of hind legs. 40 million years ago, this was the Tethys Sea. The same geological processes that created the limestone of Giza shaped the waters where those whales lived. For an ancient culture, perhaps even one predating the Old Kingdom, these marine fossils might not have gone unnoticed. Shells embedded in stone could easily have inspired myths about great floods or a primordial sea. Later, Egyptian religion placed watery chaos at the heart of creation. The god Adam was said to rise from the waters of Nun onto the primeval mound, a myth that resonates uncannily with the geological truth beneath Giza. If the pyramids reused stone from older sites, then some of those fossil-bearing blocks may be double-time capsules. First, a record of an ancient ocean. Second, a silent witness to earlier structures dismantled and repurposed by later builders. Modern petrographic studies, microscopic examinations of rock samples, have revealed variations in the Giza limestone that don't fit the simplest quarrying models. While often presented as geological puzzles, these findings have archaeological weight. If stone was moved across long distances or even across ages, it reshapes the story of how the pyramids were built. Next time you see an image of the Great Pyramid, try to strip away history in your mind. Remove the weathering, the shaping hands of ancient workers. Picture the stone in its first life, resting under warm, shallow seas, sunlight filtering down through green water, layers of shells and silt slowly burying it. Imagine the uplift that brought it to the surface, the cutting and hauling that raised it skyward. The pyramid is not only a monument to human ambition, it is also a monument to Earth's own deep history. Every block carries the whisper of forgotten oceans, a reminder that all land was once sea, and all monuments are built on the bones of worlds long past. Stand today on the Mediterranean shore at Alexandria and feel the salt wind, the sting of brine, the crash of waves against stone. Beneath those restless waters lies another city, an older Alexandria, swallowed centuries ago by earthquakes, floods, and the rising sea. Divers exploring the bay have found temples, statues, and massive blocks of quarried stone lying in silence, as though waiting to be remembered. The loss of coastal cities is not unique to the modern age. Land and water have always shifted. The Nile Delta, flat and fertile, has forever balanced between the river's gift of soil and the sea's hunger to reclaim it. The Nile Delta has always been both a gift and a risk. Sediment carried by the river pushes the shoreline outward, yet storms, floods, and the slow rise of sea level constantly work to reclaim it. Over millennia, towns have appeared, thrived, and then vanished, not only from maps but from memory. At the end of the last ice age, seas rose by more than 100 meters. The scale of loss is almost impossible to fathom. Vast stretches of land disappeared beneath the waves, along with any coastal settlements that once stood there. In Egypt, this means much of the prehistoric Nile Delta now lies under the Mediterranean, buried beneath layers of silt. Odd fact, in the year 2000, underwater archaeologists rediscovered the lost city of Heraklion, also known as Thonis, in Abu Qir Bay, northeast of Alexandria. Once a bustling port during the late Pharaonic and early Hellenistic periods, it sank about 200 years ago, likely from earthquakes and the liquefaction of sandy soil. Today, divers have found statues, temples, docks, anchors, even the preserved timbers of ancient ships resting in the mud. But imagine pulling back the shoreline not just by 1,000 years, but by 10,000. Egypt's coastline would have stretched far to the north with a broader delta branching into wide lagoons and marshes. Such an environment, rich with fish, fertile with silt, and open to both river and sea trade, would have been ideal for early settlement. If an advanced culture flourished here before recorded history, this may have been its heartland. And when the seas rose, that chapter would have been erased. Historians debate whether we should expect monumental structures to survive beneath the sea. Some argue that waves and erosion would have destroyed them, or that later peoples would have scavenged their stones. Others note that stone can endure remarkably well under the right conditions, especially when quickly buried, much like ancient shipwrecks and harbors. Around the world, there are intriguing hints. Off Yonaguni Island in Japan, massive stepped formations raise questions about whether they are natural or engineered. In India's Gulf of Kambat, sonar has mapped large geometric patterns on the seabed, possibly remnants of ancient architecture. And in the Bahamas, the so-called Bimini Road has fueled speculation of prehistoric sites lost beneath the waves. Whether these examples are man-made or not, they reveal how much of human history could still be hidden underwater. Closer to Egypt, sonar mapping of the Nile Delta shelf has uncovered buried river channels, rivers that no longer exist on land. These submerged pathways may once have been the lifelines of early settlements. If we could dive along them, we might find entire villages or even monumental remains sealed away for thousands of years. If the earliest phases of the pyramids truly predate the end of the Ice Age, then perhaps their builders belong to a wider coastal civilization. The monuments of Giza, raised high on a plateau, would have survived the rising seas, while sister sites near the coast drowned. In that case, the pyramids may not only be monuments, but survivors, markers left behind by a culture whose true expanse now lies hidden beneath the Mediterranean. Stand on the shore today and gaze out over the waves. It's easy to imagine a line of ancient cities stretching into the horizon, harbors lined with stone quays, now erased by the tide, markets once filled with the scent of fish and grain, priests raising their voices in temples whose columns now lie broken on the seabed. Imagine that somewhere beneath the green water rests a missing chapter of Egypt's story, a chapter that might explain why the builders of Giza seem to arrive already knowing how to carve and raise stone on a colossal scale. The ghosts of those coastal cities still whisper in the waves. You can't hear the words, but you can feel their weight, especially when you remember that the sea is always hungry and the shoreline is never still. We like to picture history as a neat scroll of dates, each year carefully inscribed, each event placed in sequence. In truth, it is more like a half-burned library, shelves missing, pages warped, whole volumes lost to time. The story of Egypt, as told in textbooks, begins around 3100 BCE, when Narmer, sometimes called Menes, unified Upper and Lower Egypt. Not long after, hieroglyphic writing appears, already fully formed. To the casual reader, it seems as if writing was invented overnight, coinciding perfectly with the birth of the pharaonic state. But this is the trap of written history. It makes civilization appear to begin only when it becomes visible on paper. Odd fact, the earliest preserved shopping list in human history doesn't come from Egypt at all, but from Mesopotamia. Inscribed. On a clay tablet around 3500 BCE, it records deliveries of beer, bread, and livestock, mundane inventory that survived while entire oral epics vanished. That is the bias of archaeology. Stone and clay endure, while memory and myth dissolve. If the earliest builders of Giza lived before writing, they left no texts to explain their work. Their tools, clothing, and wooden structures decayed long ago. Their words and stories vanished with their voices. Later pharaohs could easily stamp their own names and claims onto the monuments, forever binding the pyramids to their dynasties in the eyes of history. Historians still debate how writing systems emerge. In Egypt, hieroglyphs appear suddenly, already sophisticated, as though an entire unseen evolution of symbols and drafts preceded them. The same is true in Sumer, where cuneiform arrives in a mature form, with no surviving early stages. It is as if a novel appeared with no notes, no rough copies, only the final draft. Without writing, cultures rely on oral traditions to carry their memory forward. Oral tradition can be astonishingly resilient. Some Aboriginal stories in Australia appear to preserve events from over 7,000 years ago, but it is also fragile. Details blur, timelines stretch into myth, and history merges with legend. If Egypt inherited oral traditions from an earlier civilization, they may have become the myths of gods and creation stories we know today, echoes of events too old to recognize. Odd fact, when Napoleon's scholars documented Egypt in the 18th and 19th centuries, They recorded local traditions claiming the pyramids were built before the biblical flood. Though dismissed as folklore, such stories reveal that alternative memories of the monument's origins persisted even into recent centuries. The absence of early writing creates the illusion of sudden brilliance. In our history books, the pyramids appear as if they were built by a society only a few centuries removed from the invention of writing. It makes the leap from mud brick houses to the largest stone monuments in history feel almost miraculous. But if we allow the possibility of an older, undocumented building tradition, the leap becomes less impossible, yet far more mysterious. Who were those earlier builders? And why did their works vanish? Perhaps they built in regions now drowned by the sea or buried under desert sands. Perhaps they used wood, plaster, or unbaked clay, materials too fragile to survive. Or perhaps their monuments still stand in plain sight, repurposed and renamed by later rulers until their origins were erased. Writing has a way of fixing ownership. When Khufu's name was painted in hidden chambers of the Great Pyramid, the monument became his in the eyes of history, whether or not he truly built it. The earliest written mention often becomes the origin story by default. Without older documents to challenge it, the narrative solidifies, and so we are left with a paradox. Writing is our most trusted guide to the past, yet it is also our most selective. It preserves a thin slice of human experience, favoring literate elites and durable materials. Everything before that moment is guesswork, inference, and imagination. Interpretation and imagination fill the gaps of history. And for a site like Giza, that means the truth may be far older and far stranger than the tidy timelines suggest. If the pyramids truly rise from foundations laid before writing itself was invented, then they are not only monuments to stonecraft, but also to memory, a memory that endured without words, carried instead in the weight of the blocks and the perfection of their alignment. They remind us that the absence of a written record does not mean the absence of a story. It is an invitation to look closer, to read the silent language of stone, and to imagine the hands that shaped them long, before anyone thought to carve a name. For as long as humanity has gazed at the pyramids, one question has persisted: who could have built them? To later Egyptians, the answer was not always their ancestors. Some believed the great monuments were the work of beings from an earlier age, giants, demigods, or the mysterious followers of Horus. In myth, these builders were larger than life, sometimes literally. The followers of Horus appear in ancient king lists as rulers of a semi-mythical era before Egypt's unification, said to have reigned for thousands of years. Their names survive only in fragments preserved in priestly records. Were they symbolic? Ancestors, legendary culture heroes, or distorted echoes of real figures long forgotten? Historians still wrestle with that question. Odd fact, the Palermo stone, a basalt slab preserving one of the earliest king lists, devotes an entire section to god-kings who ruled before the first human pharaohs. Their reigns are measured not in decades but in centuries. Clearly not literal by modern standards, yet the pattern mirrors other ancient traditions, from the Sumerian king list to biblical genealogies, in which the earliest rulers live impossibly long lives. Such lists may represent an attempt to compress vast stretches of oral tradition into neat genealogies, transforming generations of leaders into single, long-lived figures. Legends of giants are nearly universal. In some Egyptian stories, the pyramids were said to be the work of enormous beings capable of moving colossal stones with ease. We can dismiss the literal idea of giant humans, but the persistence of the motif raises an intriguing possibility. Perhaps giants was a metaphor, a way of describing people whose knowledge and abilities towered over later generations. To those who no longer possessed certain techniques, the original builders may indeed have seemed superhuman. And then there are the tools. Archaeology tells us that the Old Kingdom Egyptians used copper chisels, dolerite pounders, wooden sledges, and ropes. Experiments show that with time and manpower, these could cut limestone blocks and drag them short distances. But granite, basalt, and the hardest limestones used in key parts of the pyramids are another matter. Some interior blocks are so finely cut and polished that they fit together with gaps thinner than a sheet of paper. Can such precision be achieved with the known toolkit? Copper, even hardened, dulls rapidly against granite. Dolerite pounders can break away flakes, but to achieve flat, polished surfaces and edges that meet at perfect right angles is an entirely different challenge. Modern engineers who have examined these stones still debate whether the methods described are sufficient to explain the results. The granite beams of the Great Pyramid and the massive sarcophagus-like box in the king's chamber have often sparked awe. Modern engineers sometimes remark how difficult it would be to reproduce such work without steel tools or high-speed cutting equipment. And then there are the mysteries carved into the stone itself. A handful of Egyptian artifacts show concentric, spiral grooves inside drilled holes, almost like the thread of a screw. These markings suggest a rotating drill bit pressed steadily into the stone. Experimental archaeology has recreated similar marks using copper tube drills and abrasive sand, but the process is painfully slow. To achieve the depth and uniformity seen in the ancient examples would have required not just patience, but an extraordinary level of control. This has kept speculation alive. Some fringe theories propose the use of lost technologies, perhaps harder metals that vanished from the archaeological record, or even chemical techniques for softening stone. Mainstream archaeology finds no solid evidence for such tools, yet the precision of the work still raises questions. It's possible that ancient craftsmen had methods well within their reach that we simply have not rediscovered, techniques abandoned once the era of monumental building came to an end. If a pre-dynastic culture once worked at Giza, they may have developed their own specialized tools over centuries, later lost to time. The pharaohs of the Old Kingdom could then have inherited these structures, adapting their more modest technologies to maintain or expand them. This may explain why parts of the Giza complex show striking differences in style and precision, layers of construction from different hands, different ages, and different toolkits. The myths of giants and gods may be echoes of this technological layering. To a mason in 2500 BCE inheriting a flawlessly cut granite block from an earlier age, the unknown maker could only be elevated to divine status. And once a builder is declared a god, the question of how disappears into the realm of the sacred. The pyramids, then, are palimpsests, not only of stone but of belief. Beneath the official inscriptions and royal names, there may lie a memory of older tools, sharper skills, and builders whose mastery was so great that later generations could only mythologize them. For most people, the pyramids are tombs, grand, resting places for pharaohs who claimed the mantle of gods. That is the story you'll read in textbooks, on museum plaques, and in mainstream Egyptology. Yet, even within this orthodox view, One fact stands out. No pharaoh's body has ever been found inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. The so-called sarcophagus in the king's chamber is empty, its lid long gone, with no sign it was ever sealed around a royal mummy. That vacuum of certainty has given rise to another idea, one far outside conventional archaeology, the Giza power hypothesis. According to this speculative theory, the Great Pyramid was not a tomb at all, but a machine. Not in the sense of gears and cogs, but as an architectural device, designed to harness, generate, or transmit energy. To be clear, no archaeological consensus supports this idea. Yet it persists, fueled by the pyramid's unusual design. The Grand Gallery, for example, is a steep passageway with soaring corbelled walls, nearly 8 meters high, far larger than needed for a simple corridor. Its precision is astonishing. The limestone blocks fitted so tightly that not even a knife blade can slip between them. Lower down, the so-called Queen's Chamber contains 2 narrow shafts that lead nowhere, ending at stone doors fitted with copper. Above the king's chamber are 5 massive granite relieving chambers stacked like a giant layer cake, officially explained as a way to divert the weight of the pyramid. But some argue they could have served another unknown function. The orthodox view holds that these shafts were symbolic, aligned to stars of the afterlife. Alternative theorists, however, suggest they may have been part of a system to channel energy, acoustic, electromagnetic, or even hydraulic. And in 2017, new evidence deepened the mystery. Using muon radiography, a kind of cosmic ray imaging, researchers discovered a hidden void above the Grand Gallery. At least 30 meters long and with no known entry, its purpose remains a mystery. Mainstream scholars see it as a relieving space or an unfinished chamber. Others wonder if it was integral to the pyramid's true function, whatever that might have been. The hypothesis, most famously championed by author Christopher Dunn, suggests that the Great Pyramid was more than stone stacked into shape. According to this view, the pyramid's limestone casing and granite core may have been engineered to generate vibrations, perhaps even resonating with the earth itself. Inside the king's chamber, the granite blocks are rich in quartz crystals. When placed under mechanical stress, quartz can produce a measurable electrical charge, a phenomenon called piezoelectricity. If the chamber were exposed to certain vibrations, these crystals might indeed generate energy. Moving from theoretical physics to ancient reality is a leap, yet proponents argue that the pyramid's geometry, alignment, and materials could have been intentionally arranged to amplify and focus such forces. They point to astonishing details. The pyramid's base is aligned to true north, with an error of only a few arc minutes, and its proportions appear to encode mathematical constants like p and the golden ratio. Whether these features were deliberate or coincidental remains hotly debated. But if we entertain the possibility, another question emerges. Energy for what? Some imagine the pyramid as a kind of wireless power station, an echo of Nikola Tesla's bold experiments. Others envision it powering tools, illuminating light sources, or even energizing medical devices, evidence, they say, of a civilization far older and more advanced than dynastic Egypt. The more cautious interpret it as symbolic, an architectural attempt to harmonize with cosmic principles through geometry, vibration, and material. Ancient monuments often served multiple roles. A temple could be a place of worship, a political statement, and a celestial calendar all at once. A tomb might double as a map of the heavens. If the Great Pyramid did hold some secondary function, whether practical or spiritual, it would only add to its significance. But in the absence of hard evidence, we are left only to trace possibilities. And yet odd details persist. Visitors to the king's chamber often remark that sound behaves strangely within its walls. Certain frequencies seem to linger, resonating through the granite as if the stone itself is alive. Musicians who have experimented there found that tones around 110 hertz can produce standing waves in the chamber, making the air hum in a way that feels almost physical. Was this resonance a deliberate feature, or merely a byproduct of massive architecture? No one can say. If the pyramid, or part of it, was constructed before Khufu's reign by a culture with tools and goals we no longer recognize, then perhaps its purpose was also different. The Old Kingdom pharaohs may have inherited a structure already ancient, repurposing it into their own sacred traditions. With time, any memory of its original function could have faded, leaving behind only the enigma we see today. The Giza Power hypothesis is unlikely to ever be embraced by mainstream Egyptology, yet it remains a reminder that even the most studied monument on Earth holds secrets. Was it a tomb, a machine, a star map, or something that combined elements of all three? Its survival across millennia is itself a message that the mastery of its builders still humbles us. The pyramid whispers another truth as well, that history is full of blind spots. For every clue uncovered, countless others have been erased, buried, or overlooked. Nowhere is this more true than in Egypt, where shifting sands, rising waters, looting, and modern sprawl have hidden as much as archaeologists have revealed. We are tempted to think of the Giza Plateau as fully explored, measured to the last stone. The reality is far different. Much of it remains buried beneath meters of sand or swallowed by the city of Cairo. Even within excavated zones, many areas have been left untouched for decades, not from lack of curiosity, but from lack of funding and time. This is archaeology's greatest limitation. It can only reveal what it has the resources to uncover. Archaeology is limited to what someone is willing and able to look for. Scholars continue to debate how many major monuments might still lie hidden beneath Egypt's deserts. Ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging have revealed tantalizing shapes, rectangles, lines, and patterns that could be walls, roads, or foundations. Some are dismissed as natural formations. Others await exploration. But in a country as geologically and culturally layered as Egypt, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Odd fact. In the 1990s, archaeologists surveying near the pyramids discovered what appeared to be a series of buried boat pits, long, narrow trenches meant to hold ceremonial vessels. One of these, near the Great Pyramid, contained a fully preserved cedar ship over 4,000 years old. The Khufu ship, now painstakingly reconstructed, had been sealed in its pit and buried beneath centuries of sand, completely invisible until modern excavation unearthed it. If a massive wooden ship can remain hidden just a few meters from one of the world's most famous monuments, what else might still be waiting under the desert? The archaeological blind spot extends beyond sand dunes into the heart of modern cities. Ancient Memphis, once a bustling capital, now lies beneath villages, farmland, and Cairo's sprawling suburbs. Fully excavating it would mean demolishing entire neighborhoods, an impossible task. The same is true for sites in the Nile Delta, where contemporary settlements sit atop layers of history. Occasional construction work exposes pottery shards, walls, or even tombs, only for the remains to be quickly buried again. Urban expansion isn't the only obstacle. Some regions of Egypt are off limits due to political, military, or logistical constraints. Even when permits are granted, excavation is painstakingly slow, especially when dealing with fragile structures weakened by centuries or by earlier, less careful digs. Odd fact, in the 20th century, Cairo's sewage system flooded part of the substructure of the Pyramid of Unas, forcing archaeologists to halt their work for years. Water and archaeology have always been uneasy companions. Moisture seeping into stone or mud brick can cause irreversible damage. Rising groundwater in the Nile Delta threatens to dissolve buried ruins before they can even be studied. Then there is site bias. Funding and public interest focus on famous locations: Giza, Luxor, the Valley of the Kings, while countless smaller sites are neglected. This skews our understanding of history. The picture we build comes from the most visible and monumental remains, not necessarily the most representative. Giza may seem like a sudden leap into monumental architecture because we haven't found or haven't looked for the smaller, earlier steps that led to it. Imagine an earlier phase of pyramid building, not on the Giza Plateau, but in the lowlands of the Nile Delta. Smaller, yet similarly designed monuments, constructed in a time of wetter climate and fertile land, could have existed. Then, as sea levels rose and the delta shifted, these structures were lost beneath silt and seawater. Today they lie buried, waiting for someone patient enough to uncover the missing chapters of Egypt's story. Some of these lost monuments may lie dozens of meters below the surface, invisible except to advanced underwater archaeology, perhaps centuries away from discovery. Historians still debate how much weight to give these missing links in Egypt's monumental history. For some, the absence of earlier large-scale stonework proves that the Giza pyramids were unprecedented achievements of the Fourth Dynasty. For others, it merely reflects our limited view, a snapshot through the narrow lens of what has been excavated so far. Archaeology is not immune to politics. Certain finds are celebrated, others quietly downplayed if they don't fit the accepted narrative. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, some discoveries were filed away or forgotten simply because they raised questions that could not yet be answered. Today, with sophisticated tools and global collaboration, these questions might be addressed, if only someone chooses to look. The archaeological blind spot is not just a gap in the sand, it is a gap in our willingness and ability to ask questions. Somewhere under the desert, the streets, or beneath the sea, there may be stones that could rewrite Egypt's past. Until then, the Giza Plateau stands in its strange isolation, a monumental peak in history, its base hidden deep beneath dunes and water, waiting for us to learn how to see it. Stand before the Great Pyramid, and it seems utterly unique, a singular monument rising from the Egyptian sands. Yet step back and look at the broader ancient world, and faint reflections of Giza's ambition appear across the globe. Other sites, where humans shaped stone on a scale that defies easy explanation, share certain architectural traits: massive blocks, uncanny precision, alignments with the heavens, and extraordinary durability. In the high Andes of Bolivia, Puma, Punku lies like the bones of a fallen giant. Andesite blocks, some over 100 tons, are cut with perfectly straight edges, sharp 90-degree angles, and smooth surfaces that almost gleam. Many fit together like giant puzzle pieces, without mortar. Far to the north, in Lebanon, the Roman temple complex at Baalbek rests on colossal stone blocks, some around 800 tons, fitted so tightly no paper can pass between them. Were these stones cut by earlier builders and later repurposed by the Romans? Odd fact, off Yonaguni Island near Japan, divers found stepped terraces and sharp-edged platforms under the waves. Some argue they are natural, others suggest human origin, possibly predating rising post-Ice Age seas. In Micronesia, Nan Madol is a city of artificial islets connected by canals, built with massive basalt columns stacked without cranes or wheels. Like Giza, its geometry seems intentional, and legends speak of powerful brothers moving stones with magic, echoes of Egyptian myths of giants and Horus's followers. Mainstream archaeology often favors independent evolution, different cultures, solving similar problems. Yet the coincidences of precision, geometry, and alignment, sometimes with astronomical events, across oceans and millennia are striking. Stonehenge marks solstices. Malta's temples align with equinox sunlight. Giza's pyramids point to true north with astounding precision. Whether by chance or design, these monuments resonate with the same questions. How, why, and with what knowledge were they built? If Egypt's great monuments came from a pre-dynastic culture, they may share more than superficial traits with these distant sites. Perhaps they reflect a deeper lineage of ideas about permanence, the cosmos, and humanity's place within it. Or perhaps they are independent expressions of something universal in humans, the urge to build in stone, reach for the stars, and leave a legacy that outlasts a lifetime. Standing at Giza, you feel that echo radiate across time and space, touching. Pumapunku, Baalbek, Stonehenge, Nan Madol, and Yonaguni. Whether the connections are real or imagined, they hint at an ancient world far larger, stranger, and more interconnected, if only in spirit, than we often credit. History often imagines civilizations collapsing slowly. Political decay, economic decline, invasion. Yet Earth itself sometimes delivers a faster verdict. Climate shifts, sudden and severe, can force entire societies to vanish or transform almost overnight. Imagine an advanced prehistoric civilization living on the Nile margins, capable of building Giza-scale monuments under the shadow of a volatile climate. One of the most striking examples of such sudden change is the Younger Dryas, a rapid cooling event. Around 12,900 years ago, the Younger Dryas began. Just as the planet was warming at the end of the last ice age, global temperatures plunged once more, and for more than 1,000 years, ice age conditions returned across much of the northern hemisphere. This was no minor blip. It shifted rainfall patterns, disrupted ecosystems, and in some regions brought agriculture to a halt, particularly in the Fertile Crescent, where some of humanity's first farming communities were taking root. People were forced to abandon settlements and revert to mobile, survival-based lifestyles. Historians still debate the cause of the Younger Dryas. Some theories point to the sudden release of meltwater from North American ice sheets into the North Atlantic, disrupting ocean currents. Others suggest a comet or asteroid impact, supported by layers of microscopic glassy spherules and elevated platinum found at sites across continents. Whatever the cause, the effect was catastrophic. Rapid, global-scale disruption, devastating for any society dependent on stable weather and steady harvests. Odd fact, Greenland ice cores marked the onset of the Younger Dryas with a temperature drop of around 8 degrees, 14 degrees, within just a few decades, fast enough to be noticeable within a single human lifetime. Imagine being a farmer or builder, watching the rhythms of planting and harvest collapse. If a pyramid-building culture had existed along the Nile before this period, the younger Dryas could have fractured it completely. Seasonal floods might have failed. Food production could have collapsed, and populations might have splintered into smaller, scattered groups. The knowledge and organization needed for monumental construction could have vanished in a single generation. The structures themselves might remain, but their creators, their names, language, and purpose would be swallowed by time. Then came the African humid period, beginning around 14,500 years ago and lasting until roughly 5,500 years ago. It transformed the Sahara into a green expanse of lakes, rivers, and fertile savannas, a golden age for life in North Africa. Abundant water, fertile land, and thriving wildlife created ideal conditions for human settlement, but its end was abrupt. Within a few centuries, or perhaps less, the climate shifted again, and the Sahara reverted from lush savanna to arid desert. Even the most adaptable cultures would have struggled to survive. Its fingerprints remain in the archaeological record. Rock art across the central Sahara depicts giraffes, elephants, and hippos, species requiring plentiful water. As the desert advanced, these images disappeared. Communities that once thrived around lakes and green valleys either migrated toward the Nile or vanished entirely. If monumental sites existed in the Sahara during its green phase, most would now be buried under dunes or eroded beyond recognition. Odd fact: in Chad's Baru and Ennedi Plateau regions, archaeologists have uncovered stone monuments and burial mounds dating back over 7,000 years, now stranded in some of the driest terrain on Earth. These remnants hint at complex societies, flourishing in landscapes now considered uninhabitable. Climate erases in subtler ways, too. Along the Nile, rising or falling water levels can bury settlements under meters of silt or wash them away entirely. Over thousands of years, the river has repeatedly changed course, sometimes by kilometers, meaning ancient towns and ceremonial sites might lie beneath farmland or under stretches of desert where no one suspects they exist. One would hardly think to dig. In the Nile Delta, rising seas and shifting sediments create a landscape that is constantly in motion, a place that could hide the traces of early civilizations for millennia. Historians still debate whether the disappearance of these potential sites explains why Egyptian monumental building seems to appear suddenly in the Old Kingdom. Was it truly a beginning, or simply the first chapter to survive after countless earlier ones were erased? The idea that climate can obliterate civilizations is not confined to prehistory. Even in recent times, extended droughts have toppled empires. The collapse of Mayan cities in the 9th century CE is often linked to prolonged dry periods. The disappearance of the ancestral Puebloans from Chaco Canyon in the 12th century may have had similar causes. These examples remind us that complex societies are never immune to nature's whims, and that their most impressive achievements can outlast the people who built them, leaving future generations to speculate about their origins. If the Giza pyramids are survivors from an earlier epoch, then they are more than monuments. They are climate refugees. They stand on high, dry ground, safe from floods, beyond the shifting channels of the Nile. Here, the sand that buries much of the past also preserves it. The culture that raised them may have been swept away by sudden shifts in wind and water. Yet the stone endured, waiting for a later civilization to discover, repurpose, and claim it as their own. In this way, the very climate that erased a culture may also have been the climate that preserved it, wiping away all but the largest, most immovable traces, leaving today's monuments as peaks of a mountain range whose foothills lie hidden, drowned, or buried in sand. If an ancient, advanced culture truly thrived along the Nile before the end of the Ice Age, and perhaps even began the earliest forms of the pyramids, then a pressing question arises. Where are their dead? Every known civilization leaves behind burials, bones, grave goods, and traces of ritual. Yet if such a pre-dynastic pyramid-building culture existed, its people seem to have vanished without leaving a cemetery. This absence, the silence of the bones, makes some scholars hesitant to consider the idea at all. But the lack of remains could be misleading. Human bones are fragile, far more perishable than stone. In wet or humid environments, they can decay entirely within centuries. Even in dry regions, they crumble if not protected. Over the last 10,000 years, shifting water tables in the Nile Valley may have drowned graves, while wind-blown sand repeatedly exposed surfaces, scattering remains to the sun until they became dust. Odd fact: in the hyper-arid Atacama Desert of Chile, mummies over 7,000 years old survive intact. Yet just a few hundred kilometers away, in slightly less dry conditions, human remains from the same era are entirely absent. Preservation is a matter of circumstance and chance. Preservation is a lottery, and climate is only one of the players. Historians still debate whether the absence of bones necessarily means the absence of people. In some ancient cultures, elaborate burial rituals involved cremation, destroying skeletal remains entirely. Others practiced forms of sky burial, leaving the dead to be consumed by animals and the elements. If our hypothetical pre-Ice Age Nile culture followed such customs, they could have left virtually no physical evidence behind. Then there is the question of relocation. If climate change forced a mass migration, the bulk of the population might have left the Nile Valley entirely. Any burial grounds they left could be far from monumental centers, hidden in regions still unexplored, or buried beneath landscapes now inaccessible. We must also remember that much of the archaeological record is shaped by the accidents of discovery. Most excavations in Egypt have concentrated on sites associated with known dynasties. The further back we go, the less targeted our searches become. Without inscriptions or recognizable artifacts to mark a burial as significant, early remains might have been overlooked, misidentified, or discarded. Odd fact: in the 19th century, many tombs uncovered by Egyptian workers were emptied of bones without any formal record because antiquities dealers valued the grave goods, not the human remains. That loss means we may never know the age, health, or genetic background of those individuals. Another complication is the fragility of ancient DNA. The hot Egyptian climate rapidly degrades genetic material, leaving only the most sheltered specimens suitable for analysis. Even when remains are found, they may yield no recoverable DNA. Linking any individual to a hypothetical earlier population becomes a matter of educated guesswork, relying on skull shape or bone measurements, methods far less precise than modern genetics. Historians still debate whether the genetic evidence we do have supports continuity or change in the Nile Valley's population over the last 10,000 years. Some studies suggest a relatively stable core population with intermittent outside influences. Others propose more dramatic population shifts, but given the fragmentary nature of the data, it is possible that a small earlier population could vanish from the record entirely, absorbed or replaced by later arrivals. Cultural factors further complicate the picture. Later, dynastic Egyptians placed enormous emphasis on preserving the body for the afterlife, giving rise to mummification. But earlier cultures may have viewed death differently, leaving no monumental tombs or preserved remains. Their dead might have been placed in simple, unmarked graves, exposed to the elements, or interred in now-lost floodplains. Over thousands of years, such traces would vanish without a trace. It is even possible that the builders themselves intentionally left few traces. Nomadic or semi-nomadic peoples, highly mobile and adaptive, could achieve monumental feats of construction without leaving behind the kind of archaeological footprint we expect from later civilizations. Remarkable feats of construction do not always leave behind the human traces we expect. Consider the great stone circles of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built by hunter-gatherers more than 11,000 years ago. They left behind intricate stonework, but almost no permanent settlements and very few burials. A pyramid-building culture could have operated in a similar way, gathering seasonally for construction before dispersing again. Such a pattern would leave a monumental footprint, but a faint human one. The silence of the bones is unsettling because we want them to speak, to tell us who these people were, where they came from, and what became of them. Yet silence, too, can tell a story. It may hint at rituals and beliefs we cannot reconstruct. It may point to climate forces that scattered or destroyed populations, or it may simply remind us that the human record is far more fragile than the stone one. If the pyramids are the last voices of an older culture, then their builders' bones may have been claimed by the Nile, the sand, or the wind long before the first pharaoh walked the plateau. We stand in their shadows, hearing nothing but the hum of history in the stone. Sometimes, silence speaks loudest of all. If there truly was a culture along the Nile before the dawn of the pharaohs, one capable of raising the first forms of the pyramids, then they must have spoken, sung, argued, and prayed. They must have had words for their tools, their gods, and their fears. Yet if they left a language behind, it has vanished as thoroughly as their bones. What remains instead is an echo, faint, distorted, perhaps hidden within the earliest layers of Egyptian myth and writing, or buried in place names whose meanings have long since been forgotten. Language is one of the first casualties of time. It is also one of the most mutable things humans create. When people migrate, they blend their speech with that of others, and in just a few centuries, the original words can become unrecognizable. If an Ice Age Nile culture was replaced or absorbed by later settlers, their vocabulary could have dissolved into the evolving river of Egyptian speech, leaving only isolated fossil words behind. Historians still debate whether traces of such an older tongue survive in the Egyptian language as we know it. Ancient Egyptian itself, first attested in writing around 5,000 years ago, belongs to the Afro-Asiatic language family. It shares features with Berber, Semitic, and Chadic languages, suggesting deep prehistoric connections across North Africa and the Middle East. Yet within its oldest inscriptions are words that resist clear comparison. Odd. Archaic terms whose origins are unclear. Some linguists think these may be remnants of a substrate language spoken before Egyptian fully emerged. Odd fact. In modern Egypt, some Nile place names cannot be explained through Arabic or Coptic, the later descendant of ancient Egyptian. They may be linguistic fossils handed down over thousands of years from cultures long erased. Place names are remarkably durable. They can survive even when their original meanings are forgotten. The Nile itself might once have been called something entirely different by a people whose words have not been spoken aloud for millennia. If the builders of the pyramids, or their precursors, left no written records, we can only imagine what their script might have looked like. Early dynastic hieroglyphs already display a high level of sophistication, as if writing emerged fully formed. This puzzles scholars because writing systems elsewhere, such as Sumerian cuneiform, show clear stages of development from simple pictographs to complex scripts. In Egypt, the missing earlier stages could mean either that they have been lost or that writing was introduced suddenly, perhaps adapted from an older system now vanished. It is not impossible to think that the earliest hieroglyphic signs were inspired by symbolic carvings made by an earlier people. Rock art in the eastern and western deserts, some dating back over 7,000 years, shows animals, boats, and human figures in stylized forms. While not writing in the formal sense, these images could have served as a symbolic language, a way to communicate ideas across time and space. Historians are still debating whether the myths preserved in later Egyptian religion might be retellings, however distorted, of events or beliefs from this deeper past. Stories of the first gods describe an age when divine beings walked among men and established the order of the world. Some interpret this as pure mythology. Others see it as a poetic memory of an earlier, perhaps more advanced age, later reframed in divine terms. Odd fact: in some creation myths, the pyramids may never speak in words, but they record a history older than any human memory. Stone does not lie. In its layers, fractures, and weathering, there are traces of everything it has endured. If the pyramids, or at least their earliest forms, were built before the end of the last ice age, the stones themselves may hold the quiet proof. You only have to know how to listen. Much of the Great Pyramid's bulk is made from local limestone quarried right on the Giza Plateau. Limestone is a sedimentary rock formed in shallow seas millions of years ago, containing fossilized shells and fragments of marine life. These fossils are a story that stretches far deeper than human history. But the real question is not when the stone formed, it is when it was cut, moved, and set in place. Historians are still debating whether the weathering patterns on some pyramid blocks and nearby structures, such as the Sphinx enclosure, are consistent with the hyper-arid climate of the last 4,500 years, or with an earlier, wetter period in Egypt's prehistory. Proponents of the older Sphinx theory point to deep vertical fissures and rounded edges on the limestone walls, features that can be caused by prolonged rainfall. Critics argue that wind erosion and salt crystallization could produce similar effects. Yet if the weathering truly is rain-induced, it would imply exposure during the African humid period or even earlier, when North Africa was far wetter than today. Odd fact: under a microscope, stone surfaces reveal tiny mineral deposits formed by water percolating through them. These mineral patterns can sometimes be dated, offering a rough timeline of when a surface was last exposed. In theory, if pyramid stones were found to contain such ancient layers beneath later surfaces, it could suggest they were reused from older structures. The granite blocks in the king's chamber and elsewhere were quarried in Aswan, nearly 900 km to the south. Transporting them was an enormous undertaking even for the dynastic Egyptians. If these blocks were originally quarried in an earlier era, when Nile channels or flood levels were different, their journey might have been easier. Their survival into later construction would indicate a tradition of reusing sacred or valuable stone. Historians continue to debate whether tool marks on certain blocks indicate copper chisels, harder stone pounders, or techniques now lost to history. On some granite surfaces, microscopic grooves appear too fine and consistent to have been made with basic tools. They could result from abrasion with sand and harder minerals over time, or hint at methods we no longer recognize. Odd fact, archaeologists studying ancient quarries sometimes find unfinished blocks still attached to bedrock, with wedge holes and channels showing exactly where work stopped. If similar unfinished blocks were ever found at Giza and dated before the Old Kingdom, it would be a seismic shift in how we understand the pyramid's origins. Then there is the question of mortar. The pyramid's builders used a gypsum-based mortar that has survived remarkably well. Chemical analyses reveal microfossils and minerals from distant sources, suggesting the formula might carry clues about the era of its production. If some samples predate 4,500 years ago, it would support the idea that parts of the pyramid are older than conventionally thought. Stone can also preserve unexpected clues. Tiny bits of charcoal, plant fibers, or insect remains trapped during construction. In rare cases, these inclusions have been radiocarbon dated, offering glimpses into when the materials were embedded. Some tests on pyramid mortar have returned surprisingly early dates, though results remain controversial, with critics citing potential contamination. Odd fact, laser scanning of stone surfaces can reveal microtopography, minute ridges and depressions invisible to the naked eye. These can be compared with erosion models to estimate how long a surface has been exposed. By reading the skin of the stone, researchers might one day determine how long the pyramids have endured under sun, wind, and rain. The pyramids may never speak with words, but through their geometry, proportion, and very substance, they whisper stories older than history itself, waiting for those who are willing to listen, here long after you are gone. Its story is layered, fragmented, and incomplete, but it is authentic, written in the language of weight, weathering, and geometry rather than words. The pyramids endure as witnesses, carrying within them echoes of lost hands, lost voices, and lost nights, silently preserving a history that may forever exceed our reach. Odd fact, even today, subtle vibrations, footsteps, wind, distant traffic travel through the stones in ways that can be measured. Seismologists and engineers have found that massive blocks transmit sound and resonance across meters. In a way, the pyramids hum with memory, a faint but persistent testimony to their endurance. They do not speak in a human tongue, but they respond to the world around them. Perhaps this is how we listen, not for the voice of a civilization, but for the impressions left in the stones, the physical evidence of labor, care, and intention. The marks of tools, the arrangement of massive blocks, the subtle erosion patterns, all are traces of human presence, human thought, and human ambition. The pyramids do not lie. They are records older than texts, older than bones, older than dynasties. To stand before them is to stand before time itself. And if we ever learn to read it, even just a little, we may begin to understand the lives, struggles, and ingenuity of those who first dared to raise stone toward the sky, leaving behind a monument that refuses to be forgotten. The plateau is quiet now, but it remembers. And in that remembrance lies the mystery, the wonder, and perhaps one day, the answers we seek. The hypothesis, popularized by authors like Christopher Dunn, suggests that the Great Pyramid may have harnessed the natural properties of its limestone and granite to generate vibrations, perhaps even in resonance with the earth itself. The granite in the king's chamber contains quartz crystals, capable of producing an electrical charge when mechanically stressed, a phenomenon known as piezoelectricity. Subjected to specific vibrations, these crystals might have generated measurable energy. While moving from possibility to historical reality is a stretch, proponents argue that the pyramid's geometry, alignment, and internal structure could have been designed to focus and amplify such vibrations. The pyramid's base aligns with true north to within a few arc minutes, and its proportions encode mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio. Whether by design or coincidence, these features invite speculation. If energy was generated, what might it have been used for? Some imagine a primitive wireless transmission system, echoing Nikola Tesla's ideas. Others envision tools, lights, or even medical devices powered by the monument itself. Yet more cautiously, the pyramid may have been symbolic, a monumental expression of cosmic principles designed to harmonize with the universe. Ancient cultures often imbued their monuments with layers of meaning. A temple could serve as both a place of worship and a political statement. A tomb could model cosmology as much as it housed the dead. If the Great Pyramid had a secondary purpose, practical or symbolic, it does not diminish its spiritual significance. Visitors to the king's chamber often note that certain frequencies linger in strange ways, resonating through the granite. Musicians experimenting there have found that notes around 110 Hz can set up standing waves in the room. Was this intentional or a coincidence of architecture? If an earlier civilization constructed part of the pyramid before Khufu, possessing a different technological toolkit, perhaps its original purpose was something entirely different. The pharaohs may have inherited structures whose function was already lost, adapting them to dynastic tradition. Over time, the memory of any other purpose vanished, leaving only the stone and the mystery. The Giza power hypothesis may never gain mainstream acceptance, but it reminds us that even the most studied monument on Earth retains secrets. Whether the pyramid was a tomb, a machine, a star map, or a combination, its endurance speaks to a mastery that continues to humble us. It also hints that the truth might be more complex than any single explanation. History leaves clues and blind spots, yawning gaps where evidence has been erased, hidden, or overlooked. Nowhere is this more apparent than in Egypt, where millennia of shifting sands, rising waters, looting, and urban growth have concealed as much history as they have revealed. While we may imagine the Giza Plateau fully explored, much remains, buried beneath meters of sand or hidden under modern Cairo. Even open archaeological zones have areas barely touched for decades due to limited resources. Ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging have revealed tantalizing rectangles and lines that might be ancient walls, roads, or foundations, though some are dismissed as natural formations. In the 1990s, archaeologists uncovered a fully preserved cedar ship near the Great Pyramid, buried in a boat pit for over 4,000 years. If such a ship could remain hidden so close to one of the world's most famous monuments, what else might lie undiscovered? Urban expansion, political restrictions, and logistical challenges also limit excavation. The shifting Nile, rising groundwater, and desertification further obscure early settlements. Funding and interest favor famous sites like Giza, Luxor, and the Valley of the Kings, while smaller locations are neglected, skewing our understanding of history. Some argue that the sudden appearance of monumental architecture in the Old Kingdom may reflect only what survived, not the true beginnings of pyramid building. Early monuments could lie deep in the Nile Delta, buried under silt, sand, or seawater, awaiting future discovery. Similar patterns appear worldwide. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, massive and precise stone blocks lie scattered. At Baalbek in Lebanon, trilithon stones weighing hundreds of tons puzzle historians. Beneath Yonaguni near Japan, underwater terraces suggest ancient engineering. And in Micronesia, Nan Madol demonstrates careful geometry and massive stone construction. Across continents, cultures have left monuments of remarkable precision, suggesting either independent parallel innovation or a faint, long-forgotten network of knowledge. Megalithic structures often align with astronomical events, hinting at a shared intent to observe the heavens. Stonehenge, Malta's temples, and Giza all demonstrate this. Whether independent or connected, such achievements remind us of humanity's urge to reach for permanence, to leave a legacy beyond the lifetime of any individual. The Giza Pyramids may thus echo not only the Nile's civilizations, but a global rhythm of human ambition. Climate has played a decisive role in shaping civilizations. The Younger Dryas, beginning around 12,900 years ago, plunged the planet back into Ice Age conditions, disrupting early agriculture and forcing migrations. The African Humid Period, by contrast, once turned the Sahara green before its rapid desertification forced communities toward the Nile. Monumental sites that existed during wetter periods may now lie buried or eroded. Even if advanced pre-dynastic societies flourished, climate could have erased most traces, leaving only enduring stone. The absence of human remains complicates this picture. Fragile bones decay, burial practices vary, and migrations may have left cemeteries far from monumental sites. Early Nile cultures may have cremated, left bodies exposed, or dispersed entirely. Even DNA can degrade in the hot climate, making genetic continuity difficult to trace. Archaeology filters history through chance, emphasizing dynastic monuments while overlooking smaller, older communities. Some ancient achievements, like the stone circles of Göbekli Tepe, demonstrate that nomadic peoples could leave a monumental footprint without a permanent human record. Language, too, is ephemeral. A pre-Ice Age Nile culture might have had words for stars, rivers, and stones that are now lost. Ancient Egyptian itself may contain substrate words from earlier, vanished languages, oral traditions, myths, and symbolic. Carvings may preserve echoes of these lost tongues, but much remains speculative. Writing could have emerged fully formed in the dynastic period, perhaps inheriting symbolic concepts from earlier peoples. The pyramids, silent and immovable, may be all that survives of an older world view. Even stone carries memory. Weathering, patterns, microtopography, tool marks, mortar composition, and inclusions, such as plant fibers or charcoal, all offer clues. Some studies hint at exposures predating the dynastic period, though contested. Granite from Aswan required massive transport. Limestone from Giza preserves fossils from millions of years ago. Each grain of sand, each rain streak, each erosion pattern is an archive of time. The pyramids have endured climate shifts, population changes, and the rise and fall of civilizations. They are silent witnesses, perhaps holding proof of a time before the pharaohs. Standing on the plateau at night evokes a sense of timelessness. The wind softens, city lights flicker in the distance, and the stars trace their slow arcs. Imagine the last night of a vanished culture. Builders observing failing rains, retreating rivers, and shifting seasons. Fires may have burned in camps, elders passing knowledge orally, while the stones awaited future generations. Over decades, the plateau would quiet, the work of humans transforming into the work of gods. Even if parts were buried beneath sand and later re-exposed, the cycle may have preserved the pyramids through ages of chaos. Stone erodes, sand grinds, and the desert reclaims its own. Yet the pyramids endure, a testament to lost knowledge, vanished languages, and vanished peoples. They keep their secrets patiently, teaching that mystery itself can be a form of knowledge. As you stand among these ancient giants, you feel a shiver of wonder, a connection to the countless generations who came before, and perhaps to a culture that preceded them all. The pyramids may not speak in words, but their silence echoes across millennia, a quiet invitation to listen. Good night. You have seen more nights than any human will ever know, and you will remain long after we are gone.